Hey, welcome to Tesla Shorts Time Daily, episode 423, coming to you from Vancouver. It's April 1st, 2026. There's a lot to cover in Tesla land today, but honestly, the news cycle felt unusually quiet, so I figured we'd do something different instead of rushing through the usual headlines. Here's what's making news in the Tesla Shorts Time world today. Rather than chasing the daily noise, we're going to step back and dig deep into one of the most important topics for the company right now, vehicle autonomy. Specifically, what actually has to happen for Tesla's full self-driving to move from an impressive beta to true, unsupervised, eyes-off, regulatory-approved robotaxi operation. I want to break it down the same way I would if we were grabbing a coffee on a rainy Vancouver morning, just walking through it piece by piece without hype or doom. This matters for anyone who owns a Tesla, invests in the company, or simply wants to understand where the EV transition is headed over the next decade. Because while the cars have come a long way, turning them into genuine robotaxis isn't just about the software getting a bit smarter, it's about multiple complex systems lining up at the same time, and I think a lot of us, myself included, sometimes lose sight of how many pieces have to click into place together. Let's start with what unsupervised actually means in practice, because the terminology gets thrown around a lot and it can get confusing. Right now, Tesla's full self-driving remains a level 2 system according to the SAE scale. That means even when the car is handling most of the driving, whether it's navigating city streets, merging onto highways, or dealing with traffic lights, the law and the engineering safety case still treat the human driver as the essential fallback. You have to stay attentive, hands ready, eyes on the road. True unsupervised operation flips that completely. The vehicle would be able to drive safely without any human inside paying attention, or in some cases without a human inside at all. That represents a major jump to SAE level 4 in specific operating domains and eventually level 5 everywhere. The difference isn't just incremental software improvements. It requires technology, regulation, operations, and business models to all mature together, and that's why it's taken longer than many hoped. So let's look at the 4 big pieces that all have to come together for this to actually work. We'll start with the core capability itself, the raw technical ability of the car to drive itself in the real world. The first critical piece is raw capability. Tesla's betting heavily on end-to-end neural nets trained on millions and millions of miles of real driving data, with the goal of handling every edge case a human driver would encounter. Think about rain-slicked roads with construction zones, erratic pedestrians stepping out suddenly, emergency vehicles approaching from odd angles, or those weird intersections that seem to break every normal traffic rule. The idea is for the system to generalize from examples rather than relying on hand-coded rules that try to predict every scenario in advance. This approach has delivered surprisingly fast progress in recent years. I've watched the videos and the improvement from version to version feels genuine, yet the last few percentage points of reliability remain extremely difficult to achieve. Moving from a system that disengages once every 10,000 miles to one that might only need intervention once every 10 million miles demands enormous amounts of diverse data and relentless engineering effort. Even if the car can technically drive itself almost perfectly in most conditions, that alone isn't enough because the real world keeps throwing new surprises at you. That brings us naturally to the next piece, which often gets underestimated: validation and safety proof. Regulators aren't going to sign off on unsupervised operation just because Tesla says the neural net is now really good. They want structured testing, massive simulation libraries, and often some form of explainability or deterministic fallback when things get tricky. Tesla's method relies heavily on real-world data and shadow mode testing, where the car constantly predicts what it would do even while a human remains in control. This generates an enormous data set across hundreds of thousands of vehicles, which is a real strength. But turning that mountain of real-world data into something that regulators in multiple jurisdictions will actually trust and approve is a different kind of challenge altogether. Each region, whether it's North America, Europe, or China, brings its own rules, timelines, and political pressures. Even if the technology hits the required level of performance, the proof process itself adds significant time and complexity. I've come to think this might be one of the most underappreciated bottlenecks. The third piece centers on hardware, and this one hits closer to home for a lot of owners. The inference computer in the car has to deliver enough compute power, efficiency, and redundancy so that a single component failure doesn't create an unacceptable safety risk. Tesla has already moved through Hardware 3 and Hardware 4, and they're now developing the next generation system, sometimes referred to as AI 5 or Hardware 5. Each new version brings more processing power and better cameras, which is exciting from a technical standpoint. However, every hardware jump also raises compatibility questions for the millions of vehicles already on the road. Owners who paid for full self-driving capability years ago expect those cars to eventually operate as robo-taxis. If the existing hardware in older models cannot safely run the final unsupervised software stack, it creates both customer relations headaches and real business challenges for Tesla. Hardware readiness is therefore not some side issue, but a core requirement that needs to be solved at massive scale. It's one of those things that sounds straightforward until you start thinking about the logistics of retrofits or software compromises. And then there's the fourth piece, which might be the most practical of all: the operational and business challenges of actually running a robo-taxi fleet. This goes way beyond the car simply being able to drive itself from point A to point B. It includes managing charging schedules, interior cleaning between rides, routine maintenance, over-the-air software updates, remote assistance for those rare but inevitable edge cases, and figuring out the right insurance model. The economics only work if you achieve extremely high vehicle utilization and a dramatically lower cost per mile than traditional human-driven ride-sharing services. That requirement puts pressure on everything from how quickly a car can be cleaned and turned around between trips to how you resolve unusual situations that might pop up at 2 in the morning in some remote part of town. Fleet operations turn out to be a major undertaking that a lot of observers, myself included at times, underestimate. The car driving itself is impressive, but building the entire supporting infrastructure around it is where the real sustained work happens. All of this still has to happen inside a complex and often slow-moving regulatory environment. Approval will likely begin in limited geofenced areas and under specific conditions before any broader rollout can happen. Some places might start with certain highways or sunny day operation in cities like Phoenix or Austin, where the weather is more predictable and the infrastructure is newer. Each jurisdiction, including California, Texas, China, and Germany, has its own rules, timelines, and political pressures. Rolling out unsupervised driving nationwide or globally would be a multi-year process even after the core technology is considered ready. And we can't ignore that high-profile crashes anywhere in the autonomous vehicle industry can set the whole sector back, regardless of which company is involved. The regulatory path, therefore, remains one of the largest variables still ahead, and it's one that Tesla can't fully control on its own. So what does cracking this actually mean for Tesla as a company? Success would dramatically increase the value of the existing fleet because those vehicles could generate revenue while owners aren't using them. The energy business would get a boost too, since robo-taxis tend to charge more often and more predictably than personal cars sitting in driveways. The data flywheel would spin faster as well, creating even more training information for future improvements. On the other hand, any delays mean continued cash burn on those massive compute clusters and all the development work. Competitors who follow a more conservative LiDAR-based approach might close gaps in certain markets during that time. The difference between an impressive beta and regulator-approved profitable unsupervised autonomy remains wide, and it's important to acknowledge that honestly. Progress on full self-driving has been genuinely impressive over the last couple of years. The way the system now handles complex urban driving feels night and day compared with earlier versions. I remember watching some of the first city streets betas, and they were pretty rough. Yet impressive demonstrations and fully approved eyes-off operation are still separated by a meaningful gap. That gap sits at the intersection of technology, regulation, and operational execution, and it's not going to close by magic. One thing worth discussing a bit more is how difficult the final stretch of this journey truly is. Many people outside the industry assume that once the car drives well, in most situations, approval will follow quickly. The reality involves proving safety at a level that satisfies multiple independent regulators simultaneously, often with different priorities and risk tolerances. Tesla's real-world data approach is powerful for rapid iteration, but regulators often look for additional forms of structured validation that go beyond miles driven. Hardware differences across the vehicle fleet add another layer of complexity that cannot be ignored, especially when you have cars from 2019 still on the road alongside brand new ones. Operational details like consistent cleaning standards and reliable remote assistance may seem mundane, yet they ultimately determine whether the business model actually works at scale. High utilization isn't automatic. It has to be engineered into every part of the system, from the app experience to the physical logistics. These challenges don't mean success is impossible, but they do explain why timelines have stretched in the past and why it's smart to stay measured. Tesla has shown an ability to solve hard engineering problems before, and the combination of data scale, neural network advances, and vertical integration gives the company meaningful advantages. Still, the regulatory and operational pieces require patience and careful execution rather than pure speed. Understanding the full picture helps set realistic expectations about when and how unsupervised operation might arrive, and I think that's valuable whether you're an owner, an investor, or just someone following the industry. This topic sits at the center of how many people think about Tesla's long-term value. If the company can close the gap, the implications for owners, investors, and the broader industry would be substantial. The existing fleet could transition from being primarily a transportation asset to a revenue-generating platform that works for you while you sleep or work. Energy demand patterns would shift in predictable ways that could benefit Tesla's other businesses, like Megapack and charging infrastructure. At the same time, the competitive landscape continues to evolve with different technical approaches being pursued by other players, some of whom are taking a much more cautious path. Keeping a clear-eyed view of both the real progress and the remaining work feels like the responsible way to follow these developments. That's what I wanted to lay out today. Not a victory lap and not a pessimistic take, but the actual shape of the challenge as I see it. Because if you're trying to understand Tesla's valuation, its competitive position, or whether your vehicle might one day help pay for itself, this remains the single biggest variable. Before we go, keep an eye on any new regulatory signals or hardware updates that could shift the timeline in the coming months. Tomorrow we'll be watching for any fresh developments that might emerge once this quiet period ends. That's your Tesla news for today. TSLA closed at $371.75, down $3.25 or 0.9%. If you found this useful, a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify really helps new listeners find the show. You can also find us on X at Tesla Shorts Time. I'm Patrick in Vancouver. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you tomorrow. This podcast is curated by Patrick, but generated using AI voice synthesis of my voice using ElevenLabs. The primary reason to do this is I unfortunately don't have the time to be consistent with generating all the content and wanted to focus on creating consistent and regular episodes for all the themes that I enjoy, and I hope others do as well.